Welcome to Coming Out and Beyond LGBTQIA plus stories and support. My name is Anne-Marie Zanzel and I came out later in life. I'm a lesbian, an ordained minister, a mom, a partner to a wonderful woman, and I coach people who are coming out later in life. I believe through sharing story, we can connect, educate, and feel we are not alone. Through listening to another story, we can often hear our own. Today's guest is Tammie. She came out at 50 after a 24-year marriage and 3 kids. She is a nonprofit executive director and works in the state of Washington. Hello, Tammie.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm really good. New year, very excited about what's ahead of us.
Hopefully good things, right? After this crazy effing year.
All good. It's all going to be good.
So Tammie, tell me your story.
Sure. So I was about 50 years old. My kids were, 2 of them were on their way to college or in college. And I was sitting at the breakfast table one day and my youngest said, "Oh, well, with my oldest daughter heading out to college soon, it would just be the 3 of us." And at that moment at 50, I realized, oh my gosh. And then soon it's just going to be the 2 of us. And I had to come to grips with how unhappy I was and what I wanted to do with what I consider the second half of my life. I, at that point, really had nothing to kind of attach it to or what I was going to do. But I knew that I had not been happy. I didn't know why I wasn't happy really at that time. I certainly knew that I was thinking about women, which I really didn't kind of attach to anything until I started to have some feelings for a woman that I worked with. It didn't really occur to me anything about, maybe I'm a lesbian or maybe I'm gay, anything like that. I just knew that I had some pretty strong feelings for this person. And those for me kind of reignited a desire to be happy again. I was no longer willing to just survive, which was the current case. So she and I we were more in contact. And once I shared with her how I felt, it was clear to me that I needed to end my marriage. And I knew that,
excuse me,
bless you. I knew that I couldn't go any further until I did that, until I at least made that break and had a separation. So that's what happened. And I think, unfortunately, it was a huge surprise to my then husband. And in the coming months became a huge surprise for everybody that I knew. We had managed to create really as perfect a sort of family as you could imagine. And we never fought. There was never anything outwardly that my kids would be able to say, "Oh, well, yeah, of course, you guys weren't happy," because our whole life was focused on them. And so that's made it difficult. It was difficult. It was a difficult conversation. I think a lot of us moms feel like it's our job to create the perfect household. And I think those of us who came from really dysfunctional families. My mother was an alcoholic. She was married 3 times. Drug addict, prescription drugs. You go through life wanting everything to be different. And for me, it was wanting everybody to believe that my life was perfect and that all of those ugly things didn't exist. And so this was a huge realization to accept to myself that it wasn't going to be perfect. I was going to be divorced. I was going to have to confront those feelings. And it was tough. So I moved out. I'd never lived by myself ever. And that was a very scary time. Even now, 3 years later, I have a hard time saying, yes, I'm a lesbian, because I hadn't really considered that. So I think I'm still in that phase of growth.
Well, and I also think it takes a long time to, it takes a long time to feel like it fits. I think that's one of those things. And I think people are expecting, well, oh, I have a girlfriend and I'm with somebody. Oh, shouldn't I feel like a lesbian? But like as you and I know, I think it just takes a while. I think it's such a shock to the system when you come out and you divorce a long time marriage and you have a bunch of kids that it just takes a while to like get comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things that you had said once was straight women don't lay in bed thinking about women and wondering if they're gay. That's what I come back to is like, okay, yes, that was me.
So let me ask you some questions now in retrospect. I mean, I know you said, when your daughter was at the breakfast table and it's just going to be the three of us, and you said, oh my God, I don't know if I want that. Um, you said a bunch of things, but you said you never, like, you didn't put the pieces together that, oh, maybe I'm attracted to women and that, and, oh, I'm not happy in the marriage. I mean, those all sort of like now they have something to do with each other, but they're not everything. So like as you look back at your life, do you realize that, hey, maybe I was gay and I didn't realize it? Or is it something that is like fluidity, which people talk about? And there are some people that just don't think about this and it was never something for them until they get a little bit older or fall in love with somebody. How about you?
Right. Right. I can probably, and this is in retrospect, I can probably look back at maybe a few times in my life where I sort of had thoughts about things that I sort of thought I shouldn't be thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts about women's bodies or, other people, which I guess I just never associated with anything. Or I just
Mm-hmm.
didn't allow myself to associate it to anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then interestingly, I had always decoupled my unhappiness in my marriage with the fantasies of women that I had. And
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of, that didn't come, I didn't realize the connection to that for a while. I
Mm-hmm.
had been unhappy. I'd been clearly sexually unhappy with my husband for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I kind of labeled it as, oh, well, every other married woman for a long time that I've talked to says the same thing.
Mhm,
I don't
mhm,
want my husband anywhere near me. I'm like, okay, well, that's all of
mhm,
us are like that. But there were certainly times when I'd say, no, this can't be it. It can't
mhm,
be this. I remember very early on wishing that my husband would agree to more of a just kind of a co-parenting partnership,
mhm,
which he was not interested in at all. you know, um, but I think I had gone through so many decades of trying to be something
mhm,
that I didn't really realize the impact it was making or the toll it was taking until confronted that morning with either you decide you're going to be happy or you decide that you're not. But it's going to be right in your face very soon. And I could pretend with my kids in the house. Uh, I was scared to death at how I could possibly pretend when it's just two of us.
mhm. I want to get back to something that you had said before. You said when you were younger, you were like thinking. You said, "I shouldn't be thinking about this." And you
Yeah.
said, "Where was that message from you? Like, what was the messages you received when you were young?" Um,
Yeah. I came from a very religious family, but I didn't come from a family that was intolerant.
mhm,
And I grew up in the Bay Area. I was
mhm,
around gay people all the time.
mhm.
Um, although I was a teenager in the 80s, so you really didn't talk about that kind of stuff. But I don't think that there was any intolerance.
Even in the Bay Area, like where it was so prevalent.
That what?
Like, you just didn't talk about that stuff, being gay or
You
anything
you
like
didn't. You didn't talk about it. It was still seen as a negative where I grew up, which is down in the peninsula.
that. Mhm,
Um, it was still seen as something you didn't want to be. I mean, and I regret, those sorts of thoughts, but
mhm,
that's what we were when we were growing up.
mhm,
Um, yeah, so I can't really pinpoint it as that. I just
mhm,
knew that it wasn't that that sort of thinking at the time was not going to get me on that path of,
mhm,
husband, house, kids, picket fence, vacation, minivan, all of those things.
And you wanted those things when you were young. Like it was very clear,
Absolutely.
because for me it was, you and I come from very similar backgrounds. A little bit different was my dad, not my mom, but I came from very similar backgrounds, and we've talked about this before. Like I wanted to be married. I wanted to have children. I really wanted to have children because I thought it was going to fix something inside of me. Like
Exactly.
I remember like when I had my first daughter, who's the love of my life, and yeah, one of the loves of my life. I got a bunch, but I remember like when she was born, and it was like, I don't know, 6 weeks, 2 months after she was born, saying to another young mom, first child, um, how do you feel about all this stuff? And she's like, oh, it's so wonderful. It's the best thing I've ever felt. And then I'm like, I don't feel this way. And it was funny. Of course, I chose somebody who ended up being, she's Catholic and went on to be a homeschooler with 7 kids. But that's who I chose to ask.
To ask, yeah.
She's like, the earth mother too. But how about you? Did you have those feelings when you, because I think it's something we don't talk about as moms, that sometimes it's really like, we think that motherhood's going to fix things.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. It
Right.
just doesn't.
Yeah. Well, I thought that all of it was going to fix things. I thought that if I could have all those things, I would be happy, because this is how society tells you is you're going to be happy. I wanted to be, I wanted my life to look like my friends' families. And it never was going to, but I was going to create that. So yeah. When I had my son, my oldest, no, I didn't. I was the same as you. I had been a career person up until that point. The thought of staying home was scared the crap out of me. And he was not easy. I love him to death. This is my son, but it was not easy at all. I literally wanted to just sort of hand him over and have somebody do all that, because that was just not
It's
me.
just not who you are.
No, it didn't feel like who I was. And in fact, after my third child, my husband was so miserable in his job, we switched, and he stayed home for 14 years. And I went back to work, and that was perfect. I was like the dad of most typical families, but that was okay, because my work made me happy. So
I hear you say something that is a reoccurring theme with the later in life community, and that is about perfection. Like, I'm going to create this perfect family, and I'm going to show to the world. I think it's like almost like I'm going to show the world that I'm capable of doing this. And we sort of try, because I've talked to some people that still insist their family was perfect before they came out, yet it clearly isn't, and like, what do you think's up with that? What do you think's up with this desire for perfection? Because first of all, that does nothing but cause a lot of stress and misery in our life if we can keep trying to create perfection.
right.
So
Yeah.
what do you think? Where do you think that all comes from?
I think I'll just speak for myself. I was motivated by something that was not a loving marriage, creating a relationship. I was more interested in the optics of it. And so my motivation was just different. I think that I was striving for perfection because I wasn't really all into this. And so I guess I was creating what I felt was what you were supposed to do. That's
I'm sorry.
That's the only thing I can think of, because it was not,
I talked to somebody else that I interviewed, and she said, I came from a home where there was a lot of chaos, and that is probably one of the common denominators of the later in life group, is that we do come from a lot of times very chaotic childhoods, and a lot of times when we get married, we are like looking to create something that we never had. And we're often very
Yes.
successful at it, by the way. we're very successful in creating this like place of safety. It's
Mhm.
going to kill us on the inside, but it's a place
Mhm.
of safety.
Mhm.
And it's really hard to leave that. And so somebody said, I didn't have any example what a child, like what a normal family looked like. So I took my examples from the Brady Bunch, and from probably for younger generations, the Cosby Family, or Family Ties, or Eight is Enough, or any of those. And like that's what sort of modeled our life on, and that everything's going to be solved in a half an hour, and there's going to be absolutely no conflict, and I think a lot of
Yeah.
us do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I probably had a little bit of that, but I had some friends with some very happy families, and that was what I strived for.
Mm-hmm.
So
Hmm. So when you left your marriage, um, what was the hardest thing about it?
uh I think the hardest thing about it for me right now is the everyday. So
Meaning.
I went from seeing my kids every morning, making breakfast. What did you do today? Going to bed, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
The day I moved out was the last day I ever had any of that.
Hmm.
Um, my kids were very concerned about their dad and his happiness. And so um, that was May 1st, 2018. And I have not spent the night with any of my kids since. So I miss the everyday, the little stuff. Like when my girls come to visit and they have like a new shirt on, I I've never seen it before. I wasn't there when they came home. I wasn't there for it's the everyday kind of
Hmm.
stuff. I'm there for the big stuff, and I get to see them, as often as we can. Everybody's busy and COVID and all that garbage. Uh, so I do get to see them, and I work very hard at preserving and growing those relationships.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that's the part that's been the hardest. I think for the most part, creating that little perfect family for so many years was successful in creating kids who are going to be able to handle something like this. So that
Hmm.
was a good thing, and for the
Hmm.
most part, I say. Um, but uh, yeah, that's the part that I miss the most.
Really interesting too is that it was about it was about leaving your family and losing your family, in the sense that you haven't lost your family, but in the sense of how you knew it, how it existed. You haven't lost your family just changed, right?
Exactly.
And so it's interesting, you don't even mention your ex-husband or anything like that. So that wasn't the hardest part of for you. It was
No.
losing the closeness with I understand that, because for me, even though my ex-husband and I are like now friends, sort of, I didn't that's not what I miss. I don't miss um, being married to him or anything like that. What I do miss is how my family used to be. And I think that's part of the grief.
Yeah.
And I think it's really normal to grieve all that stuff. And I don't, and people think there's something wrong with them because they're grieving stuff. Doesn't mean you want to go back there, right?
Yeah. No.
No, it doesn't mean you want to go back there. It's just grief,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just grief. And how have you dealt with that? How have you dealt with the grieving the little things and missing the little things in your life?
Oh. Um, well, like I said, I try to preserve those relationships.
Hmm.
So I haven't allowed those big changes to make me bitter. So even though my kids haven't spent the night with me, I haven't, made that a huge thing. Um, I keep in contact with them a lot.
Hmm.
It's different. We're texting now. We FaceTime all the time. They come up here. Uh, it's just different. I spend a lot of time. Uh, I spend a lot of time uh, journaling and writing stuff down, just kind of
Hmm.
getting it out.
Hmm.
Uh, um, Yeah. I mean, I have support from other people like yourself,
Mhm.
people who are also in this same kind of
Mhm.
situation. And that's been helpful. I mean, once I started to find those people, uh,
Mhm.
everything changed. And I probably started to create that network about 2 or 3 months after I moved out. I just felt like I was floating in the middle of the ocean all by myself. And there has to be other people who have done this besides me.
Mhm. So how
Um,
did you create the other network? What did you do? Because I think that a lot of times when people find my website, they find it by Googling and they think they're the only person in the world, and they're not. There's a lot of us
yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
So what did you do? What are the steps you took to create community?
Well, most of my community is online. So, especially people who are in the same situation. And so, there are Facebook groups, there's your group, there's support groups. That's where I have focused my
Mhm.
um, attention. And luckily, through those networking situations, I have actually physical people here in Seattle
You're in
that,
a really, really friendly,
yeah,
LGBT friendly city, which is nice.
yeah, yeah. So it's, making friends with real live people who are in the same situation.
I know
um,
that's one of those things though, is like we start out with our communities online, and then usually for most of us within 3 to 6 months, we're like, okay, I've got to find some real people,
yeah,
and some
right.
people to hang out with.
Yeah, yeah.
When we first met, one of the things that you said is that which is very, very normal, is about the imposter syndrome, like feeling, I don't know if I fit in. And, we all struggle with that in the beginning. I know you've done a lot of work around that. So, like, what would you tell people, like, when they're first coming out, and like a lot of times our first like gay person that we're really close to is often a girlfriend or a boyfriend. I mean, those are the people that we know. But how have you worked through that? Because it's so funny, Tammie, because I think of you as such a lesbian or so gay, or I don't even know what the label you use for yourself. So it's like I look at you and go, "Girl, have you looked in the mirror?" Um, but like, what have you done to really like work on the innerness of this, like saying, okay, yeah, I may not have been out, I may not have come out at 20, but I have a right to be here just as much as anybody else. What have you done to work with that? Because I feel like for me, I feel like coming out, like, I have no problem with claiming my gayness, because I had to fight really, really, really hard to get here. So no one's ever going to tell me that. Like, if somebody said to me, "Oh, you're not a lesbian because you were married for 25 years," I'm like, not your choice. It's my choice.
Yeah.
Um, I'm like, whatever. Think what you want. I don't care.
Mhm.
Um, but I feel like I fought hard for this to be who I am, and so that's how I've worked through it. How have you worked through it?
There have definitely been ups and downs.
Mhm.
There were times when with my current partner and soon to be wife, actually. Um,
Did you get engaged?
yeah.
When?
Uh, just before Christmas.
Congratulations, I
Thank
didn't
you.
know that.
Yeah.
That's really nice news. Thank you.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
really cool to hear that.
um, I think that it was just as much of a struggle for her as it was for me. Um,
Mhm,
I have lots of wonderful friends because of her, and I don't think many of them knew what to do with me either,
mhm.
because they had all been out for most of their life, or certainly had not been married and with kids,
Children.
um,
So wait,
and
they've been married, but to a woman, right? Or no?
or married
Everybody.
for a very short amount of time,
Okay.
or
Yes.
something like that. Yeah, it was not the
Any kids in the group?
there. There is
Any kids? Yeah.
one, one, but they were not married.
Okay.
Um, so I had to struggle with uh, feeling like the outsider,
Mhm.
the one that didn't have the same experiences, the one that had everything that was not in common with the group. And But I also was really honest with my partner about these kinds of things. This really upsets me. These sorts of things kind of upset me, and uh, I have to have my own path. This
Mhm.
this has to be my journey, and I was
Mhm.
appreciative that she was she heard that.
What do you mean these kinds of things have upset me?
Uh, I've never been the kind of person who wanted to be like, look at me, and so being in the spotlight is never comfortable for me.
Mhm.
And so when everybody's, making jokes, there was one particular joke because Pride was coming up, and we were sitting there, and they were talking about, oh yeah, this old girlfriend was there, and then someone looks at me and goes, how many ex-girlfriends were at Pride for you? Well, and then everyone looks because everybody clearly knows none. And that was really upsetting to have to sort
Mhm.
of be in that spotlight.
Well, that also was, if the person knew your history, that was inappropriate and just bitchy.
Well, or just a joke. And I just
Or
was
just
not
a joke.
able to, and I think it was just a joke. But for me, it was too much of a spotlight, and I felt embarrassed.
Well, I think sometimes I think sometimes I don't know if shame is, if that's too big of a word, but I do think that sometimes, when you are new to a community, we do struggle to fit in. And so when somebody points out, hey, you're not very, you don't have this in common with us, it really highlights our feelings of, maybe I don't belong, you know what I mean? And or
Right. Yes.
maybe this isn't my community. But I also think that when people know, I'm very blessed. I have not experienced that. And I think we've talked about this before, because I moved south, and I think that in the south there are a lot more people that have been married to men, and I mean, excuse me, women that have been married to men at a young age, and because of the pretty you know deep Christian values, in
Hmm.
which, not that they're really Christian values, but the Christianity that runs through here, that is quite conservative. And so a lot of women get married super young.
Hmm.
And so I've been lucky that I haven't experienced that, but I don't know. I think I've heard other stories of people getting, sort of being sidelined, and sometimes that's just not fair. It's just not.
And I think combined with kind of a feeling of trying to overcome your own otherness,
Hmm.
um, it just amplifies. I don't think anybody really. I guess I've never. I would say that I have never felt that it was intentionally uh,
Hmm.
being mean. But when
Hmm.
you combine that with wanting to fit in, it can be really
Hmm.
difficult. Um,
Hmm.
and those things don't bother me as much anymore. That was really early on,
Right.
and I think finding more
Well,
people who more people who have been through exactly the same thing as me is just it just helps me to realize, well, my story is unique. It doesn't have to be like everybody else's.
right. Yeah. And I think that at some point, like we said before, you just sort of roll your eyes when people say stuff like that, and just sort of ignore, because it's really more about them. And so than us, or people who've come out later. And a lot of times is, what you've heard me say a bunch of times, is nobody can decide your sexuality except for you. So if you haven't figured it out until you're 40 or 50 or 30, nobody can come along and say, oh no, you're not gay, or you're not a lesbian. People are just not allowed to do that. And so I think if we learn that really early on, in our coming out journey, when and if it happens to you, you'll just sort of like roll your eyes and say, okay, well,
Yeah,
this is about
yeah.
yeah. So let me ask you a couple of questions. Did you have a coming out song?
I didn't. I didn't have anything like that.
Ah, okay, I was going to do a follow up, but never mind. So, a book or a movie that you've seen or read that really changed your perspective on thing, and it doesn't have to be gay stuff.
I can't really say that I do. Um, I've always been, it's clearly been in there the whole time, because when gay marriage it was finally legal, all those kinds of things, I was crying right along with everybody else. Um,
Hmm.
And so I think it's always been in there. I guess I can't really pinpoint anything,
Anything?
any book or anything. No.
Yeah. So what is the best thing about your life today? I mean, you've been through such significant change over the last 3, 4 years. Like, what is the best thing like about now?
The best thing about now is that uh, there are no rules. And that's so hard to, I still have to remind myself. There are
Okay.
no,
So that,
I lived a life that was like so full of rules, you know, things
Mhm.
had to be like this. And it's still a struggle sometimes to remember that, but
Okay.
oh,
So
it's just such a good feeling.
okay. So I can't end this like right now. So you're going to have to tell me. I understand what you mean because I have lived it. But can you say a little bit more about the no rules? Because for me, what I hear you saying, and I might be wrong, is that I thought things were supposed to be this way, this way, this way. That I get married, I have, I have a family, I stay with my husband forever, even though I'm not super happy, and I just hang in there, and and then one day my kids will start having kids, and I'll be a grandma. Like a very white heteronormative narrative that was in my head. Even though when I was young, I definitely didn't live by that narrative at all. I was pretty, outside the box. And then I fell into that narrative because that's how I was schooled. And so now I don't have to live by that rule anymore. So, like,
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
example, one of the rules I broke is that I moved away from my minor child who lives
Hmm.
with his dad, and he's perfectly well loved and perfectly well taken care of. And just spent 2 months with him. But it was a rule. It was a huge rule. And I said, like you and I've talked about this since we both moved out of marital homes and kids stayed in the marital homes. Um, it was a huge rule. I feel like it's a huge rule that I broke. And but I had to do it. I had to. It was, my divorce was so difficult, and like I got outed everywhere in my hometown. And so I just needed to leave, and I needed to do it for me. And it was the first time I'd ever done anything specifically for me. So that for me is what you mean by rules. So I broke a rule, I broke a
Yeah.
rule. And I'm here.
Yes.
And guess what? My son loves me to death and loves Tonda to death, my partner to death. And, it's okay. But it was a huge rule for me to break. So what about you?
Yeah. The rules typically are about that, being
Yeah.
able to allow myself to be happy,
Yeah.
to put myself first.
Hmm.
Um, Even something as simple as I don't have to be to work at 7:30 in the morning. Why do I have to do that?
Hmm.
Or why do I have to? Why does going out have to be Saturday night? Why can't it be Tuesday night?
Hmm.
Um,
Because
uh,
you have to get up for work on Wednesday morning.
you know, well, there's consequences, but
That's why.
it's just it's just being able to question. Why do I have to do that? What if I felt I've always had to do that? Um,
Hmm.
and that's
Do
been
you
really
think
nice.
being as a, like what I have noticed is like, um, now being in a same sex partnership with somebody else, I realized that like all the rules that I was forced to follow, I
Mhm.
didn't want to follow them. So, for example, always had to do all the cleaning up and everything. My ex never did any of that stuff, and balked when I asked him to do that. Now I know your ex-husband was a stay-at-home dad, and so the roles were a little different. But I just like was expected to do those, and I like now being in a same-sex relationship. There's no there's no rules on who does what. Although I think our person, people feel fulfill certain roles just because of the nature of their personalities, and not because of their gender.
Yeah, yeah. You get to do things because you want to, not because you have to. I think one of the ones that, and we didn't do this year, was I could spend Christmas someplace else. So
Mhm.
primarily it was because I couldn't imagine Christmas without my kids waking up in the morning, Santa, the whole bit. But at the same time, it's like I can use this as a time to go and do whatever I want. So we
Mhm.
went to New Orleans, we went to Montreal. Uh, Being able to say Christmas can be anywhere you want it to be. It doesn't have
Mhm.
to be this with this meal, with this family, all of that stuff.
Well, and
Um,
I think COVID this year sort of changed that for
yeah,
all of
so we
us
didn't go
because,
anywhere.
like, we all learned that we can do things a little bit differently,
Yeah,
and, it it'll be okay. It's only one day, right?
exactly.
It's just
Yeah,
one day. Life
exactly.
will go on, you know? So,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
Tammy, I wanna thank you very much for your time today. It was really nice to talk to you and hear about a couple little bit of the other things that I haven't heard about before. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you for talking with me and
Of,
sharing your story.
of course. Thank you so much.